let's investigate. Let's do the forensics investigation process. Let's look at this process as it goes along, and we'll pull it apart and say, okay, let's look at this process here from a business process standpoint and from a legal standpoint. Now we're going to focus mostly on corporate business process. You're going to see that. You're going to see the BPP in this. And that's a Dean invention. That's not something that has come up from the EC Council, but it's easier to shorten up business process and policy into BPP. So what we want to do is we want to look at the methodology itself and take the steps in preparing, not the actual investigation itself, but how do we get ready for this beforehand? Now, that's really carefully designed within our organization, so the things that we do, the policies that we present, are legal to our organization. Okay, and then let's talk about the process of search warrant, how to get one, and then how to secure the scene. And we're going to talk really almost immediately about search and seizure after this. So the requirements of search warrant and evaluating and securing the scene make that next step later on much more valuable. Then we're going to collect the evidence, we're going to collect and search and seize the evidence itself. We'll talk about that very briefly in here, and then we'll work through it later on. The techniques for analyzing the data, again, that's going to be in a couple of modules. And then evidence, preparing the final investigation report, and testifying in court. These last couple things that we're talking about, we'll say, okay, and then this is what happens, this is what happened, this is what happened, and now we're done. And you're like, well, wait a minute, where's all the meat in that? Well, we can't jam it all into one module. So what we'll say is, these things that we see at the end that are on this slide right here, we're going to go through relatively fast because there's a whole module dedicated to each one. But we didn't want to just stop and say, okay, well, then there's coming up stuff. We'll just go ahead and talk about it a little bit. Okay, now we need to say, okay, before we do any kind of investigation, what do we need? Well, we need a team, a skilled technical team. We also need that interaction with the organization itself, but we need that team of people in your organization that are going to be there. This can't be one person. Ed Scotus said to me a really long time ago, he's an instructor for SANS, that we were sitting down and we were doing analysis in his incident handling course, and I was sitting next to my lab partner, and I was like, now wait, and I'd write something down, and I go, wait, hold on a second, and I'd write, he came over and goes, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm not letting my partner go on until I document the steps so that we don't repeat ourselves. We want to make sure that we only do these steps once, and if there's any failure in the step, we can go back to the step and say this is where our error was. And he stopped the class. There's like 150 people in this class, and I'm sitting in this class. This is about 12 years ago. And he says, stop, everybody. When you're doing an investigation, or when you're working in your organization, this is exactly what you want. You want one person doing the activity, and you want one person documenting it and making sure that everything is documented as you go along. That means that it needs 2 people to get this action done. So a team is at least 2. Okay, then you've got those people. Now what? Well, you better fork over some money for the workstations that they're going to need, because these aren't simple little laptops. You can't go out to Best Buy and pick one of these things up. You're going to have to spend some money on these things, and you're going to have to build them a forensic lab. We're going to talk about the whole process of forensic lab later on. I mean, it's a pretty big process. So how much money are we talking about? What's your budget? You can do it on a budget, but you're going to have to pay the people. You're going to have to teach the people well, and there's going to have to be a lot of training involved in it. They're going to have to at least have this certification that's here. So nudge your buddy over there, the guy sitting right next to you, and say, hey, why don't you get this and we'll start the forensics team for our organization. Maybe that'll help. Okay, now investigation methodology has to start off with some very simple, silly question. We've got an event. Does that actually mean that it's an incident? Does that mean it's a crime? A friend of mine called me up, and he said, I'm looking through my event viewer on my Windows NT4 machine, and Dean, I keep on noticing that every 7 minutes that the machine resets itself. And I've looked at the logs while I was gone over the weekend, and they came in, I reviewed them and I rolled in, and every 7 minutes, he goes, am I under attack? What's going on here? And I said, okay, so send me the event log. And he did, and I looked at the event log, and sure enough, I was watching it, and it was showing you all the boot process, it get all the way up, and then sure enough, every 7 minutes, plus or minus a couple of seconds, the machine would reboot. And I'm like, well, it's doing all the normal things. I said, have you gone to the server room lately? He goes, no. He goes, let me go over there, because it's in a separate building. So he goes over there, and I said, just sit there for 10 minutes. So he sat there, and sure enough, what he heard was the UPS device sending off an alarm signal and then sending it back to the server and telling the server to shut itself down. It was a bad UPS device sending the signal up to the machine to say, hey, I'm going to run out of power. You need to restart at this point. And then it would restart, and then it would send the signal again every single time. So just because there's an event, just because there are incidents, doesn't mean it's a crime. We need to go through that investigation process, and we'll talk about in triage how we do that. So we got to collect the clues. Let's pretend that we think that there's a crime at this point. Collect up all those clues and make a general assessment and say, okay, this is reasonable at this point, and we should take action. Is it worth continuing? I mean, this is a business decision at this point. It's one server, it's rebooting, or let's say that you're a multi-million-dollar company and there's one evil adversary coming in and stealing $20 worth of stuff a day. That $20 worth of stuff is probably within the margin of error. You might just go, there's the hacker again. And I've actually heard those very words in an organization. Said, oh, isn't that cute? He's coming in there and he's taking one of these parts at this particular time. I'm like, you let that go on? Because it would cost us $10,000 to go after a guy who can't steal $10,000 worth of stuff in a year. I was shocked, but okay, fine. So let's pretend it's worth going on. Okay, let's do that search and seizure, and let's build a case file against this particular person. Okay, so again, investigating that computer crime, we say there's an incident. And this is a series of events that threatens the security of our computer, our systems, our organization. We got to verify the complaints against our particular system in relation to that particular intrusion. Look at the people that are telling you this information. Usually your first responder is the help desk person or the end user that says, hey, something's going on, my machine isn't acting the way it's supposed to, or there should be a lot more parts in this database than there actually are. Hey, you know what, maybe the database is corrupt. No, somebody's actually stealing stuff. They're actually pulling it out through inventory control and having the parts shipped. So they may be your first people that are telling you what's going on. Your job is to know that and then to verify that. The DBA, we go in and say, no, everything's correct with us. Maybe we have a particular incident. Let's go and pull the transaction journal of what's going on and what the parts are being shipped. And hey, how come this order entry here says it's popping out there, but we're not doing any subsequent billing on the other side? Maybe we have to do an internal fraud audit to figure out that this person's taking advantage of this. Now, the other place that we look is for intrusion detection systems to give us alert, to give us alarm information, and to tell us that there is an unsuccessful event. And we may look in the IDS and say there was a failure here because there's a whole bunch of resets in that. It may be that there's not a failure and it's just a bunch of false positives. The other part, which wouldn't be in here, which wouldn't be telling us an alert, is the possible IDS doesn't get the event. So remember, we have all those different conditions in place, but most of the time it's a lot of data that is a false positive for us. And that's the start to investigating a computer crime.